Chapter 2, My Step 1 Experience. This chapter delves into my initial Step 1 failure and the lesson I learned from it. I reflect on why my first attempt at Step 1 didn't go as planned and inefficiencies in my Step 1 study approach. More importantly, I discuss how I took those lessons to completely overhaul my preparation strategy for the second attempt. And so what you could expect from this chapter is a candid look at the struggles I had failing Step 1, key lessons I learned about studying efficiently versus studying harder, and a shift in mindset towards mastering test-taking strategies rather than just memorizing content. And so one of the reasons why I struggled, the first time I sat down to study for Step 1, I approached it like most other medical students would. I piled up all my resources and recommendations, got deep into the UWorld question bank, and tried to tackle as many Anki cards as possible. I had heard all the advice: do thousands of questions, cover as much content as you can, and make sure you know how to fit the entire first aid book in your head like the back of your hand. But despite everything I did right, I still didn't pass on my first attempt. And I was just like, what the heck, dude? And often it's just like so much stuff that you have to do, and things that are high yield, things that are low yield, all that, right? And so looking back, I realized that my failure wasn't due to my lack of effort or my intelligence. It wasn't a poor reflection of me. It was due to an inefficiency in my process and just how I approached things. I was spending countless hours studying, but I wasn't studying the right way. I was trying to cover every possible approach on a topic instead of focusing on the areas that would truly help me on my exam. I was memorizing facts rather than understanding how to apply them in the context of Step 1's specific test structure, which is very clinical, I will say, very clinical. If you're trying to figure out how to apply things, just understand how to apply it in a clinical vignette. If you could do that, we're golden. If you can't do that, you're screwed. So the reality of Step 1. Step 1 isn't a knowledge-based exam. It's an application-based test. It doesn't ask you to recite facts or definitions. It asks you to take the knowledge you've built over the past 2 years and apply it to a complex, real-world clinical scenario. This means that even if you know everything in first aid, or you have everything memorized in terms of the UWorld explanations, it won't really matter unless you can connect the dots and apply that knowledge to answer questions efficiently. And I'll go deeper into what that looks like in practice, but just knowing random facts isn't going to help you. And so just because you know stuff doesn't mean that you can connect the dots in the way that they're asking you to. And that's the big thing. On my first attempt, I spent 8 months preparing. I did nearly 5,000 UWorld questions, reviewed about 100,000 Anki cards, and read through countless resources. Yet, when I sat down for the exam, only about 5 to 10% of what I studied on a daily basis seemed to show up on the actual exam. I could be a little biased, but it was really low yield. The material that I had been drilling just didn't seem to align with the way the questions were asked. And that experience just left me feeling just disoriented, forced me to question whether this path was really right for me. So what went wrong? The problem was that my study approach wasn't aligned with the structure that the actual test had. I spent months trying to cover a vast breadth of information without understanding how to narrow my focus to the most critical high-yield areas. I hadn't mastered the art of translating knowledge into test-taking skills. I was focused too much on memorizing and not enough on practicing the application of that knowledge to the kinds of questions that Step 1 presents. Just because you do a lot of questions doesn't mean you know how to answer a question properly and you know how to use questions effectively. But we'll talk about that later. When I finally took the exam, it became obvious that the questions on step one were very different from those that I had practiced. The practice exams and the question banks I had used were helpful to a point, but they didn't replicate the format or the distribution of the actual exam questions. And the distribution really matters. Step one tests your ability to recognize patterns and make connections and apply concepts in a time-pressured environment. It's not about knowing everything, it's about knowing how to answer the questions you're given. After failing it the first time, I knew I had to change my approach. I couldn't keep trying to learn everything. Instead, I needed to focus on high-yield material and master the art of test taking. I had to prioritize efficiency over brute force memorization. And I had to stop wasting time on resources that weren't helping me develop the skills I needed to pass the exam. That was the big thing. So what I learned, the most important lesson I learned from my first step one attempt was that studying for the exam isn't about content mastery. It's about test mastery. Step one isn't designed to test everything you know. It's designed to see if you can apply what you know under pressure. The key is not to study more, but to study smarter. It's about efficiency, targeted practice, and learning how to approach each question with a strategy. Now it's time to get real about what went wrong, what went right, and how to cut through the BS. My first attempt was just a crash and burn. I overstudied, I relied on outdated methods, and thought brute force would get me through. Spoiler, it didn't. Studying for months doesn't mean anything if you're not studying the right way. My second attempt was working smarter, not harder. I stopped trying to learn everything and I stayed focused on how to take the test. The goal isn't about knowing it all, it's about applying what you know under pressure. Step one is application, not memorization. This test isn't about regurgitating facts. You need facts, but you don't regurgitate them. You apply them in what you know to be true in clinical situations. Focus on connecting the dots, not drowning in endless details. The details don't matter. It's a multiple choice test. You probably wouldn't have chosen those answers to begin with, but those are the ones that are presented. You want to study hard, but that doesn't mean you're studying great. For me, 8 months of grinding the wrong way got me nowhere. I had to rethink everything. I had to be more efficient, not be more effortful. If your study plan isn't strategic, you're just spinning your wheels. UWorld and Anki are tools, not magic wands. Don't let these resources own you. Use them to refine your test-taking skills, not as a crutch for memorization. Practice questions are your secret weapon, but only if you use them to learn how to answer questions, not just to review content. Medical school is not the same as step one prep, and that was a tough pill to swallow. What medical school teaches you doesn't prepare you for step as much as you think it does. It's a different beast entirely. So just adjust your mindset. You're not studying to ace your coursework. You're training for the test. You can't learn it all, so don't even try. High-yield content is your best friend. Forget trying to master everything. It's impossible. You don't have the capacity and you don't have the time. Learn to prioritize what matters and get surgical with your question answering skills, because that's what's going to get you down the road. In chapter 3, I'll break down test-taking strategies that turned everything around for me. From understanding how to dissect a passage to mastering the art of elimination. I'll show you how to think like the test maker. Stay sharp. This is where the real learning begins. And bottom line, stop running a marathon when you're training for a sprint. Get strategic, get efficient, focus on what actually matters, and let's get after it. Thanks for checking this out. This is USMLE Step 1000, created by me, Stephen Christian, a space where you can turn your Step 1 prep into something smarter, sustainable, and stress-free. If you found this helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. You can follow us on Spotify for more study tips and more audio podcast stuff, Instagram at USMLE Step 1000, and you can like the Facebook page to stay connected. Don't forget to download all the resources, all the Anki decks, the clinical clues, everything from the PDFs and everything that you saw in the videos you can find at www.step1000.com. And follow the blog for more updates as well at www.usmlestep1000.com, your one-stop shop for everything Step 1000. And if you like what I'm doing here and you want to follow or at least support, you can check me out on social media at Stuck on an Island. Thanks again, and I look forward to sharing more stuff about Step 1 prep and how to overcome these mental hurdles so that you can have the best possible experience possible. So again, I'm not going to hold you any longer, but remember, let's keep pushing forward one step at a time to 1000.